I'm going to introduce you to the easiest way to build a quadcopter using what I call the Quadcopter Coach 5-system group method. We're going to start with nothing, and here we are with nothing. And on that, we're going to start with building our airframe group, which consists of the arms that we're going to mount our motors and accessories and everything to. You might have a one piece of carbon fiber with 4 arms on it, or 4 arms that bolt together. In this case, we have the 4-arm group, which would also add a bottom plate to connect it all together. Either way, the rest of the procedure is the same. Now, once we have our airframe, we're going to start putting things on it. We're going to move on to the next group now, which is the power system group. Now, the power system group supplies all the energy to the quadcopter and all its parts, and it starts with the power distribution board. Now, to get power to this board, we need a connector. We often call this the pigtail, and it has an XT60 battery connector, which connects to most quadcopter batteries, and this supplies all the energy to every part of the quadcopter. Now, once we have that together, and I'm going to simplify this by taking off the pigtail, we're going to leave the power distribution board on there while we move to the next system, and you'll see why, because we're going to be connecting a lot of things to it. So the next system that we're going to talk about is the propulsion system. This is what makes it go, and that starts with the 4 motors. Now, the 4 motors need to connect to something, and that would be the ESCs, or electronic speed controllers. These are what control how fast or slow the motor goes. And of course, to tell it what we're going to do, we have the positive battery wires that connect to those ports on the power distribution board. And to complete the circuit, we have the ground wires. Now, that supplies all the direct energy from the battery to the ESCs, but not the control, just the power. The next thing we have is, well, propellers. And that's everything that makes the quadcopter go. We're going to take the propellers off for now because that's just going to get in the way of our discussion. We're leaving the power distribution group right now, but I'm going to leave the ESCs on because I want you to see how we connect to control them. Because the next group we're going to talk about is the flight control group. Now, the flight control group is the logic that drives everything. And with that, we go to the flight controller. Now, the flight controller is a bit large right now, and that's just to make things look easier for you. It is really exactly the same size as the power distribution board, which I'm flickering right now. It actually mounts exactly on top of it in what we call the stack. Now, the first thing that you need for the flight controller is power. So we need to connect it to the power distribution board. And this is very important, the 5-volt pads. The flight controller runs on 5 volts. If you're careless and connect it to any other pad, you're going to juice it with 12 volts, and you are going to see what we call magic smoke. And if you see that, you better look forward to buying a new flight controller because you hosed that one. And that'll set you back $30. So be very, very careful that you're connecting to the 5-volt pads on the flight controller. What else are we going to connect to the flight controller? Well, we want to control those ESCs. And to do that, we have to connect the sense wires. And of course, there's 4 of them, 1 to each ESC. But that's only part of the circuit because whatever power goes in has to come back with a ground wire. Some people say you don't need the ground wire anymore, but if that were true, they would not be building them into the ESCs. So I advise you to use the ground wire. And they connect on the flight controller in that row right there. And you'll notice there's 3 rows. One is positive, one is ground, and one is sense. And these are connecting to the ground on the bottom, closest to the edge, and the sense towards the middle, and that's for the logic. The next thing that we're going to need is a way to tell the flight controller what to do with our radio. And for that, we need a receiver to receive the signals from our remote control. And we're going to be working with the Spectrum radios, so here we have a Spectrum satellite receiver. It's a great tiny little receiver and very durable. Now, there's several ways you can connect this receiver. You can actually wire it directly to the ports on the flight controller. But I don't like to do that because I often take my quad apart to do service. And there's a plug on the wire that you can insert if you are using a connector. And there it is, I'm blinking it right now. That connector you can solder right onto the motherboard, and then the wire just plugs in, so you can easily plug and unplug the receiver as you need to do service in the future. And I like to put a buzzer on my drones, and the reason is because of several things, if not the least of which is it helps you find it when it lands or crashes, because we have a system on our radio where we can turn on the failsafe by simply turning off the radio, and then that buzzer will go beep, 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 as long as the battery is still connected to their drone. Also, it gives you audio feedback when you do things such as switch modes and other things and just turning it on. So it's nice to know that the quadcopter is operating correctly by having a buzzer on there. Another nice thing to have is lights. So I like to add some LED lights at the back of the drone. If I'm flying line of sight, it really helps me get my orientation right. And also, if it were to go down, you might see the lights in the grass. In other lessons, I'll teach you how to use programmable lights, and you can make them do all kinds of cool and geeky things. The fifth and last group is the video systems group. That's what we use to see where we're going when we're flying FPV. The first part of that is the camera. And the camera, you'll see, hooks up to the battery. And if I turn the battery pigtail on, you're going to see it's on the same part as the direct sense of the battery. Now this is because this particular camera has an on-screen display, or OSD, and it will tell us the voltage of the battery as long as it's connected clearly to this pad. So these wires will come into here and the camera will give us a visual of what our voltage is. So if it's running low, we know we need to land, and that helps us be safe. The camera connects to the video transmitter. Now this is a 5.8 gigahertz system, and there's usually 40 channels available to that. I want to bring your attention here to several of these wires. For example, the yellow wire is for video, and that goes from the camera to the transmitter. The next are the power and ground wires that just go to any 12-volt pad on the power distribution board. And then we have an optional wire, audio. Some transmitters have microphones on them. Some cameras have microphones on them. And by connecting this wire, you would hear the sound if you had a headphone plugged into your FPV goggles, which can be nice if it's beyond your earshot and you want to hear the throttle response on the propellers. Now that we've explored the 5 system groups in detail, let's do a quick review. The airframe group gives us our chassis and support for everything. The power system group energizes all the components of our quadcopter. The propulsion group makes it go. And the flight control group gives it the logic that we control to fly it. And the video system gives us the visual feedback so we know how to fly it FPV. So now that we got this, we're going to use this diagram as we actually do the building. We're going to come back and review it from time to time as we go through the actual process of putting our quadcopter together. Let's get started in the next lesson. I'll see you soon.